Hi everyone, it's Annie from Hoop Sisters, and in this video I'm going to show you how to do block B2 in the Charmed Adventure quilt. I have here, I'm going to start with this picture. This is kind of a picture of the entire quilt, and if you can see, right here is our block B2. And let me give you the other picture, which is kind of a close-up of it. And it is this block right here. And it's basically a combination of the block A2 block and the B1 block. And I know that may be confusing if you haven't done the blocks already. This right here is the A2 block. And you can see it has just plain quilted stitching like on this side. The B1 block is this block. This one has a little insert on B1. And on A2 and some of the surrounding blocks, it has the pinwheel that we end up sewing to it. So let me do a little magic here by folding these blocks since we haven't actually stitched it out yet. I have folded the one block in half. So what you're going to have is basically one side's going to have an insert on B2 and the other side we're going to add the pinwheel block to it. So hopefully that makes sense. I have all my fabric ready to go. So we'll meet at the sewing machine and we'll stitch it out. Okay, I have just done step one, which is basically sew the outline placement stitch using water-soluble thread and the needle onto the battleizer, which is in the hoop. Now I'm going to add my optional wool batting. So I'm going to place that inside those placement stitches, and the machine will sew a zigzag all the way around the outside edge. And I have prepared my wool batting where I have pressed the edges. So that way your presser foot will not get caught in it. Guide it with my finger so it doesn't shift. Okay, for step 3, we're going to just stitch a placement stitch over the top of the wool batting using water-soluble thread. And we recommend you put your presser foot in the highest position that it will go. And we also, just as a little tip, just push the wool batting down ahead of the needle. Those two things will help keep your presser foot from getting caught in that wool batting. And again, the wool batting is an optional step, the previous step that we just did. So if you don't use the wool batting, you're just going to be stitching this onto the battleizer. Okay, so for step 4, we're going to take our fabric 1, which for us is the gray fabric, and we're going to place it over this area here. I'm going to go ahead and move my hoop forward so that I can get to it a little bit better, and that will allow me to be able to place my fabric where it needs to go. I'm going to, on the inside of the block, have it overlap the placement stitches that are there about 1/4 of an inch on the inside, and leave most of that fabric to lay on the outside edge. So now I can go ahead and, still continuing with the water-soluble thread, we're going to sew the tack down stitch to attach that first piece of fabric to our block. And for step 5, we're going to take our fabric 5 and we are going to place it right sides together we're going to make sure that when we place it right sides together, that when we would flip it, that it would cover that section there. So you want to make sure that you don't place it this way or this way, raw edges even, but that you do place it the correct way so when it's flipped. Before I stitch my seam though, I'm going to place some neutral thread in the needle because we don't want our seam sewn with water-soluble thread. Okay, so neutral thread in the needle, and I'm stitching the seam. Cut that thread since I have my thread cutter off. I'm going to flip this fabric for step number 6. I'm going to finger press it. I'm going to smooth it out. And still with the neutral thread, I'm going to sew a tack down stitch. And it's only going to tack it down in this area, just enough to keep it in place. And then for step 7, we're still using the neutral thread because we're going to be stitching a seam. And again, you're going to take this fabric, you're going to lay it right side down, raw edges even. And again, just do a quick little test so that when you flip it, that it is going to be covering that entire area. So let me just get it placed. And if you need to move your hoop forward, wouldn't hurt to do that. Okay, I have it placed and I'm stitching the seam. For step 8, we're going to take our fabric 6 and we are going to flip it, finger press it, smooth it out, and still with a neutral thread, we're going to sew a tack down stitch that will only stitch right there. And let me grab my fabric 1 because our step 9 is going to be placing our fabric 1 right sides together, raw edges even, and I'm going to just do a quick test. Nope, that's not right. And again, after it's placed, make sure when you flip it that your fabric is going to land the correct way. And raw edges even, neutral thread in the needle, and we're sewing the seam. Step 10, flip the fabric right side up, finger press, smooth it out, and sew a tack down stitch. The next step is step 11. For step 11, you're going to need your strip of fabric 2. That would be your center section that you have on all the blocks on the outside edge. I would say right here in the middle, if you've noticed, we've got a little bit of some threads that have gathered. We also have the points from the fabric that we've added after we've turned it. I'm just going to trim those off. And I'm going to lay my white fabric right side down, raw edges even with this edge. And since I'm using white, which is going to show through the darker fabric on the bottom, you may want to trim this fabric up a little narrower, or there's plenty of fabric that we've allowed for the cutting directions we gave you to make sure that you cover that. You don't want any of that dark fabric peeking out because then when you flip your fabric over, you'll be able to see that. So there's my fabric 2. I still have neutral thread in the needle, and now I'm sewing the seam. Cut my little thread tails, and I'm still working with the neutral thread in the needle, and I'm going to flip my fabric. I'm going to finger press it. You have to be careful finger pressing right here. There's no bed of the machine underneath it. So you do want to be careful that you have a steady flat surface underneath it. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to sew the tack down stitch. we are in step 13 and I have thread E in the needle and I still have my embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and we're going to stitch the embroideries in both of these corners, and that is basically going to be the start of our hunter's star once all the blocks are joined together. Okay, I'm on step 14 and I'm going to take my fabric 4 and I have placed it right side down with the raw edges even, and with the neutral thread in the needle I am sewing the seam. And step 15, I'm flipping this fabric over. Right side up, I'm going to finger press, and again be careful if you don't have anything, a firm surface underneath there. Here's the bed of the machine. Now I'm still leaving the neutral thread in the needle and I'm sewing a tack down stitch to hold this fabric in place. And now, using my hoop scissors, probably my mini would be easiest, I'm going to trim about a scant 1/4 inch, 1/8 of an inch, scant 1/4 inch on the outside of this stitching right here. Well, we're on to step 16 and I have thread C, which for me is a pink thread, in the needle only. I still have just embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin. We won't have to match our bobbin to our needle thread until we add our backing. So for right now on step 16, we're just going to sew a little cross stitch in this area. So I'll take a few stitches and cut the thread and do some cross stitching. Step 17, I have my water-soluble thread in the needle only. Again, I still have my embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and I placed, let's see, this is my fabric 3, right side up, not right side down, but right side up. And with the water-soluble thread, we're going to sew a tack down stitch. It goes over that area twice because that is the area where we will be trimming it right up close to that stitch line. It's doing a little mark area right there, and that is where we're going to place our insert later on when we get to that step. Okay, so now I'm going to trim it right up close to that stitch line, the curved and the pointed stitch line on the inside of the block. And we'll come back and do some more embroidery. Okay, it's step 18 and I have my thread B in the needle only, embroidery thread and embroidery bobbin thread in the bobbin, and I'm going to stitch some embroidery. I'm going to just trim my thread tail there and keep going. We are on to step 19, and step 19 we're going to add this little insert, and when you add it, if you notice that in step 17 when it did the tack down for this pink fabric, it did a little notch there and it came back and did a little stitching there, and basically this stem stitch line on your insert from block B1 C1 should line right up with the stitching there, and the same with right there. So as long as you have that in the right place, make sure you have water soluble thread in the needle only, And we're going to go ahead, hopefully I won't move it, and we are going to just stitch a tack down to hold our insert in place. Okay, it looks pretty good. So now it's time to add our backing fabric. That is a very, very, very careful squirt because I do not want my hoop to get all gummed up. So I advise you to do the same kind of gentle squirting. Line it all up. Just curious, I always want to peek again. Alright, I have my backing on, so we're going to take it to the machine, and using water-soluble thread, we're going to sew a basting stitch to attach the backing to the back of the quilt. Alright, I have my backing on. I'm going to make sure that nothing flipped over. We call that a Dunlop on Hoop Sisters terminology. And with my water-soluble thread and the needle only, we're going to go ahead and attach our backing. Okay, we basically have our quilt sandwich finished. We have all our fabric on the front, our battleizer in the middle, and our backing fabric on. So what's left to do is, since we have our sandwich finished, is we're going to do the quilting portion. I have my thread A in the needle as well as in the bobbin. This time we're matching our bobbin thread to our needle thread for the remainder of the quilt block. We always do that after we have our backing fabric on. Another tip is if you have an automatic thread cutter on your machine, at this point you should turn it off. Another thing you should also do before you begin stitching is do a needle down, needle up, and pull that bobbin thread to the top before you begin stitching. These are two tips that will help you to have a much neater, cleaner looking back of your quilt. So I'm going to just do a few stitches and go ahead and clip those thread tails and then continue on. For step 22, we have thread C in the needle and also in the bobbin, and again it's because we're now quilting our quilt sandwich. And again we're going to do needle down, needle up, bring the bobbin thread to the top, and begin our satin stitch and our quilting. Okay, now we're on step 23, and I have thread E in the needle and the bobbin. I'm going to bring that bobbin thread to the top, and we're going to sew some bubble quilting. Now we're up to step 24, which is we're going to do some quilting using our accent thread, which for me is black. So I have black both in the needle and also in the bobbin, bringing it to the top and sewing the quilting. And then I'll cut the thread tail after a few stitches. Now it's going to do some stem stitches, and both on the diagonal and also around the edge of the blue and orange area. For step 25, I have thread B in the needle and in the bobbin. I'm going to bring that bobbin thread to the top, and I'm going to sew some additional quilting. And finally, we can see the finish line. We have water-soluble thread in the needle, and we're going to sew placement stitch for the pinwheel. Well, this is our completed block, and the only thing left to do is we are going to trim it using the Trimmer 2.0. This is going to be in the center of our quilt because this is going into our Charmed Adventure quilt. So we are going to trim all four sides using the Trimmer 2.0. When we get finished trimming it, then we get to take our pinwheel and place it inside the water-soluble placement stitch that's stitched there. Now I will tell you, as far as trimming it, if you're going to do a one block wonder quilt, if any edge of this is going to be the outside edge of your quilt, and this goes with any of our blocks or any one block wonder quilts you make from Hoop Sisters, if you repeat this to make a quilt all its own, whichever side may happen to be, if it's the case, the outside edge of your quilt that will have binding sewn to it, you will trim 1/4 inch through all the layers. But since this is our B2 block, it is going in the center of our charmed quilt, or not in the center, but inside of it. So therefore we are going to trim all four sides using the Trimmer by George. Okay, here is our B2 block. That's all finished. I have my pinwheel, and I have my water-soluble marking from the very last step on this block. I'm just going to line it up, and then I'm going to turn it, and along the edges, about 1/4 inch into the seam, I'm going to just base that on, and that way when we sew our blocks together, we won't have to worry about trying to insert it at that time. Just raise the presser foot to turn my corner, and again, it's just a really long stitch just to baste it on there. So there is our B2 block finished with our pinwheel and also with our insert, and all trimmed up using the Trimmer by George. So we hope you enjoyed this video, and we look forward to showing you the next block.